pay. Where I'm going to go with my money on this one, I'm going to go all in. I'm just going to pick the money line. I feel really comfortable with Alberto Puello defeating the Spaniard, the grizzled veteran, even though Sandor Martin has almost double the ring experience. I think that his inactivity lately is going to hold true. I also think that Alberto Puello's pace, if this is going to be the same guy that we saw against GAR, I think his pressure, his output, and pace is going to be enough to outpoint Sandor Martin.
I'm sure, especially Puello's going to be going, what was I thinking here? But having said all of that, this is... I don't know.
What's up, fight fans? Welcome to my channel. This is Johnny. In today's video, we're going to be going over the statistics that nobody talks about when mentioning this past weekend's world title fight at 140 pounds between the champion Alberto Puello and the challenger Sandor Martin. Guys, before I continue, I want to say thank you to all the new subscribers. Thank you to everybody who's been with me since day one. My YouTube analytics are telling me that 85% of you who are watching my content haven't hit subscribe yet, so could you please do that right now for me? Also, could you like this video as well as hit the bell notification icon? What that'll allow me to do is pop up in your feed every time I put something out that's new. Thank you. Guys, during fight week last week, when we were breaking down the Puello versus Sandor Martin fight and we gave you my prediction, I did pick Puello to beat Martin based on Puello's slick southpaw style, based on his pace and his volume. Now, I'm not gonna lie, the first few rounds of this fight were a bit sketchy, and even when the fight ended, this could have gone either way. I wanna first say how much respect I have for Sandor Martin. That guy is all blood and guts, and when I say this next statement, I feel that it's true. If Sandor Martin had a little bit more pop in his punches, he'd be a dangerous proposition at 140. He already is a tricky guy to get out of there. He has a victory over Mikey Garcia, split decision. He lost a close split decision against Teofimo Lopez, which a lot of people think that he won that fight. And this is going to be another one of those tough losses to where he goes back to the drawing board thinking about what could he have done differently. And I think it just comes down to that power. Power is something that you can't teach. A lot of coaches will tell you this. You're born with it. You could work on it, but you either have it or you don't. And unfortunately for Martin, he just doesn't have the pop on his punches to get those decisive victories and to separate himself on a lot of close fight scorecards for the judges to see. And I think that was his downfall in this fight. When you took the pieces of the fight or little moments, it seemed to me that Puello was winning those moments. So in this video, we're gonna break down the statistics. We're gonna talk about the punch stats, the overall punches, the percentages landed, the jabs, and the power shots. Alberto Puello comes out of this fight still the champion at 140 pounds. His stock continues to rise. Boxing's a sport of what have you done for me lately? If you look at an individual fighter's career as a basketball tournament or any sort of round robin tournament, all these fighters could do is win their next fight and move on to the next one. And this is exactly what Puello did with the fight that happened afterwards when we got to see Rayo defend his belt against Gary Antoine Russell. And we know how that fight turned out. Gary Antoine Russell put on the performance of a lifetime. He took the belt from Rayo Valenzuela in a devastating fashion. And now this sets up a possible rematch because we know Puello, about 9 months earlier, defeated Gary Antoine Russell by decision. And now they're both champions. So a unified fight at 140 between Puello and Gary Antoine Russell, to me at least, makes a lot of sense. In the comment section below, let me know if you want to see that rematch or if you think Puello should go elsewhere or Gary Antoine Russell should go elsewhere. We know the champions at 140 are the aforementioned Russell, Alberto Puello, Teofimo Lopez, and Richardson Hitchens. So there's some dogs and some killers at 140 with a lot of fun fights to make in the future. Let's take a closer look at how this fight went. Guys, Alberto Puello overcame a determined challenger from Sandor Martin to retain his WBC junior lightweight title on Saturday, winning a close split at Barclays. The scores were 115 to 113 and 116 to 112 for the defending title holder, while the third judge had it 115 to 113 for Martin. And I'm not shocked by that. Like I said, guys, even though I picked Puello to win this fight on my prediction video and he won my parlay and I won money, I wouldn't have been upset if Martin would have won. It was one of those fights to where when the judges gave their scorecards and the announcer was reading it, it literally could have gone either way. Although it was Puello who finished the fight stronger in the last 2 rounds, the story of the early part of the bout was the uncharacteristic aggression from Spain's Martin. And this is what I was saying in the live stream was, in this first few rounds, I was impressed with Martin's game plan, how aggressive he came out and how frustrated he had Puello. If you would have watched the fight in between some of those rounds, second and third and fourth, Puello was frustrated with his corner. He didn't have any answers and he was really confused and discombobulated on what Martin was showing him. But as the fight progressed and Puello settled in, he started figuring out a bit more and more, and those mid to later rounds is why the judges gave it to Puello. After Martin's strong start, Puello began to claw his way back in the second half of the fight. Puello sits 24-0, 10 knockouts, made a strong statement in the 8th, landing 2 overhand lefts to begin the round. The final 2 rounds were the best of the fight for Puello, who bloodied Martin with right hooks and overhand lefts. The loss snapped a 2-fight winning streak for Martin, who will likely leave New York to return to Barcelona with a sour taste in his mouth for the 2nd straight fight, after losing a disputed split decision to Teofimo Lopez on his most recent trip to New York in 2022. Guys, now let's take a closer look at the statistics of this fight and learn a little bit about the narrative that played out. Throughout the entire fight, the overall punch stats reads Puello threw 247, landing 83 at a 33% clip, while Martin threw 321, landing 131 at a 41% clip. The body shots were on the side of Martin. Puello only landed 28 power shots, while Martin landed 85. The jabs, it was flip-flopped. Puello threw 279, landing 67 at a 24% clip. Martin only threw 120, landing 31 at a 26% clip. So this was the style of the fight. Martin made a decision to fight it in the clinch. He thought he was going to win a fight by dirty boxing, landing a lot of those bigger power punches, and which he did. But on the other hand, the contrasted style, Puello a little bit longer, used his jab more, touched Martin out more from the outside, and the judges must have saw this and gave more points to him opening the door with his power shots by landing that jab way more frequently and throwing it way more frequently than Martin. Let's look at the total punches. Puello throws 526, landing 150 at a 29% clip. Martin throws 441, landing 162 at a 37% clip. So the power shots were on the side of Martin, the jabs were on the side of Puello, and the activity from the mid to later rounds were on the side of Puello, and that's what tilted the fight. When people say robbery, when I did my tweet right after this fight, a lot of Martin fans said it was a robbery. I have to disagree. This was not a robbery. I think what we learned that Puello is for real at 140, and we already knew about Sandor Martin. This guy is not an easy out. This is why a lot of people do not want to fight him. You got to bring your lunch pill, your hard hat when you fight Sandor Martin. It's going 12 rounds or however long the fight is scheduled for, and you're going to be in the dogfight. You have to be focused the entire fight when you fight him. You have to be switched on, and you can't lose your cool. And we saw this in the early rounds. This is what was bothering Puello, and I think this goes back to if Martin just had a little bit more pop in his punches, I think the fight would have gone a little bit different. In some of these close fights that he loses, I think the judges would have saw something different. And sometimes an optic is all you need in a close fight for it to be tilted this way. So like I said, I'm not upset that Puello keeps his belt. I'm a little bit disappointed as a fight fan for Martin that he leaves again, losing another close fight, and we'll see how he recovers from this. In the comment section below, do you want to see Puello fight someone else? Do you want to see him rematch Gary Antoine Russell? And where does Sandor Martin go from here? And one more thing, was this a robbery? Let me know. My prediction, what I'm going with, this is not an echo chamber. I'm a fan of both guys, but one has to win, one has to lose. Based on their last fights, based on where they've been in their career, and based on where they're going, I'm taking on the money line, going all in, Gary Antoine Russell. I think he's going to learn from his mistakes in terms of his last fight against Puello. I think that that was a technical and a tactic issue against Puello. I feel that he's going to figure out his cardio. He's going to figure out his pace and tempo throughout the fight. And my prediction is for him to beat Rayo. I wouldn't be shocked if he walks Rayo on to something big. We saw Rayo get knocked down multiple times, eventually get knocked out against De Los Santos. I think that Gary Antoine Russell is a bigger puncher. He's obviously a bigger fighter in a bigger weight class. So that is my prediction. In the comment section below, tell me if you agree.
Any single shots from Valenzuela stand the test. What I mean by that is he always answers back in a big
Immediately and leads.
Yeah, he's always alert.
Final 60 seconds of the 7.
What's up, fight fans? Welcome to my channel. This is Johnny, and in today's video we're going to be going over the statistics that nobody talks about when mentioning last night's title fight at 140 pounds between then champion Rayo Valenzuela and the challenger Gary Antoine Russell. Guys, last night was a night of some really entertaining fights, marked off by the world title fight at 135 pounds between Tank Davis and Lamont Roach. That video, we've already covered it. I broke down the controversial decision. It's tagged in this video. Today, we're going to talk about what happened at 140 pounds between GAR and Rayo Valenzuela. When I put this fight up on our channel about a week and a half ago and I did our YouTube user poll, 65% of you guys picked Rayo to win this fight. Only 35% picked GAR. The following week, when I did my prediction video and I said, and I gave you reasons why I felt GAR was going to win this fight, still a lot of you guys chose Rayo. I understand why you chose Rayo, and Valenzuela is a fun fighter. He's entertaining. It's just that I just didn't see in his career up until that point what you guys were seeing. And going into fight night last night, I felt like the matchup was a perfect opportunity for GAR's style for him to showcase. Now, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I knew what was going to happen or I predicted GAR to put on a career-defining performance, but I did think he was going to win. I don't know if a lot of you guys were aware, if you go back to the amateur career, and this is why I was siding with GAR, was his amateur pedigree, his professional pedigree, where he comes from. In the amateurs, he fought the best of the best. He's beaten Abraham Nova, Richardson Hitchens a couple times, Jermaine Ortiz. He has wins over Jaron Ennis. So the guy has been in there with the best of the world since he was a young man. And when we last saw him against Puello, he lost his first career fight, but if you watch the first half of the fight, he looked great. It's just that his cardio and his gas tank started fading, which usually is always there. And Puello is a tricky customer to deal with, a very slick southpaw. So he was struggling later on in that fight to figure out Puello, and Puello outpointed him. Just because he lost, I thought to myself, man, I can't wait to see GAR fight again. I like to see him become more active, because that was one of the knocks on his career at the Puello fight was, I mean, he doesn't fight a lot, right? So when the Rayo fight was signed, I was like, all right, we're going to see him twice in a calendar year, in a span of 12 months. Let's see if he's improved upon what we saw against Puello, and that's why I took him. I just thought the intangibles were there. I thought it was going to be power versus speed, but Russell dominated everywhere. Russell's hand speed was ridiculous last night. His pace, his output, his cardio, he jumped on Rayo from the very first bell. And guys, all you Rayo fans, don't hate when I say this, Rayo was never in the fight. I had him losing every single round. One of the judges gave Rayo one round, but it was a complete whitewash. Rayo did his best work in the last round. He caught GAR with a couple nice shots and stunned him a bit. He even knocked GAR's mouthpiece out, but there was no point in the fight where you thought that GAR was going to lose this fight. And I think it's going to be one of those fights where Rayo did take a lot of damage, but at 25 years old, he's going to be able to learn from it. Now, stay tuned to the end of the video. I'm going to give you my output or my opinion on where Rayo went wrong, and it wasn't a physical issue. It was a game planning and his fight camp issue. And you guys know I'm a Team Garcia fan. I just feel like his camp let him down a bit in the game planning. Before we get there, let's take a look at the stats. There's a lot of them that tell the story of this fight. We're going to look at the jabs, the power punches, and the total output. Guys, Russell overwhelmed Valenzuela, throwing 957 punches and landing 252. Russell averaged 80 punches thrown and 21 punches landed per round. Valenzuela averaged 37 and 11 respectively. Valenzuela was never in the fight as reflected by the judges' scores, 119 to 109 twice and 120 to 108 all for Russell. The total jabs of the fight, Valenzuela throws 238 landing 49 at a 21% clip. Russell throws 494 landing 77 at a 15% clip. Rayo was more accurate, but the volume on Russell was just too overwhelming for Rayo to deal with. The power punches say a similar story. Rayo throws 205 landing 78 at a 38% clip. Russell throws 462, more than doubling up Valenzuela's output, landing 175 at a 38% clip. And the total punches of the fight, once again, Rayo throws 443, landing 127 at a 29% clip. Russell throws 957, landing 252 at a 26% clip. The output on Russell was insane. He came into fight week with a chip on his shoulder. He doesn't talk a lot. This guy was valedictorian of his high school. He comes from a long lineage of fighters. We know that he fights his career for his late father. We know his brother was a world champion. We know his brother's hand speed was world class. So this guy was created to become a world champion, and he finally fulfilled that dream for him, his father, and his family. He is the new champion, WBA belt holder at 140, and I like to see him fight all the champions. Because Puello defeated Sandor Martin by decision and kept his belt, it gives Russell an opportunity to unify and get his get back for his only loss. Now, what I was mentioning about the game planning, when you looked at this matchup going forward and when they signed on the dotted line, Rayo fans were saying that Rayo was going to outbox Russell. And when I saw the game plan after the first round, I thought to myself, what is Rayo's game plan? He was being so overwhelmed after the opening bell. I was like, all right, maybe I can see it in the second round. Come the second round, same sort of thing. By the third round, he's just drowning. And I thought to myself, his game plan in this fight camp, Team Garcia thought that Valenzuela was going to sit there in the ring and be able to outbox Gary Antoine Russell. I found that pretty shocking to see that that was his game plan. He did sting him a bit in those later rounds. He landed a couple big shots in the 12th, once in the 11th, but nothing too substantial to even swing the fight. We know how the fight went. It was a complete, dominant, utter, just masterful performance by Russell, but Rayo didn't have a plan B either. Can't say it enough how shocked I am by that, considering Russell's pedigree, considering his career up until this point, and his only loss was to Puello. You had Rayo coming off consecutive wins over Colbert and Pitbull, but these guys were in smaller divisions, and we know the Colbert was a knockout victory at 35, and we know that he beat Pitbull at 40, and that was his first fight at 40, and this was his second fight at 40. I just felt at 25 years old, he was in over his head. I just felt like Russell was going to be too much, and maybe I feel that Garcia's camp would have prepped Rayo to fight Russell in the clinch more. Maybe they would have engaged in the pocket and stayed at that range rather than trying to outpoint him and box him at distance. Now, Rayo did have his best work, but it was few and far between when he was able to stay at jab range. But I wish I would have seen him bodying up Russell a bit more and staying in the clinch and trying to make it a dirtier fight, because the entire moment, every single aspect of this fight was at Russell's terms, and I feel if Rayo could have leaned on him a little bit more, kind of wore down with his weight and maybe sapped that energy a bit more early on, he could have had a proper chance mid to late rounds, but we never saw it. We never saw a plan B. We didn't see any adjustments, and I think because of that, on a good end for Valenzuela, he'll be able to take that moving forward in his next fights, be able to see what he did wrong, make those adjustments moving forward if he is faced with them against another opponent who's just outclassing him everywhere the fight went. So what did you make of this fight? I know a lot of you guys picked Rayo. I understand why. He's a fun fighter, a young guy. He'll definitely be back. This guy is a name in the division, and I'm excited to see what happens to his career next. With Russell, I want to see the playoff fight. I want to see world title fights. I want to see him more active. And like I said, I can't think of a more electrifying performance from a non-champion in a world title fight in the last few years than what I saw with GAR against Rayo. Guys, in the comment section below, let me know what you thought of this fight and what do you want to see next for both guys. $26-1 odds for this decision, and you guys made fun of Shakur Stevenson pre-fight when he said this.
What you got? So who you got in our main event tonight?
I think Tank on, I'm 50-50. I don't know. You don't know? Nah, I don't know. I can't make a prediction, but 50-50.
Lamont Roach and Tank Davis fight to a majority draw. The belt doesn't exchange hands. We have to go back to that 9th round when Tank took a knee for the first time in his career and the referee missed the call. In boxing, you go to a knee, it's a knockdown. Unbelievable. What do you guys think?
Okay. I thought he had hurt his hand. Did you not take the mouthpiece? Took him out.
That's right.
Oh, here comes Davis. Davis.
What's up, fight fans? Welcome to my channel. This is Johnny, and in today's video, we're going to be going over the statistics that nobody talks about when mentioning last night's world title fight at 135 pounds between the champion Gervonta Davis and the challenger Lamont Roach. Guys, last night's fight card and Barclays lived up to the hype, in my opinion. The last 3 fights all had controversy, from the Sandor Martin to the Alberto Puello fight. People were torn on both sides. We know that decision went to Puello and the belt stayed with him. And then we had the co-main event, which was exciting in its own right, specifically with how dominant of a performance Gary Antoine Russell put on in spanking Valenzuela. I haven't seen a fighter at 140 pounds perform like that, like GAR did, in a long time. He exceeded most folks' expectations. He was an underdog going into that fight. And then obviously the main event with Tank and Roach. Stay tuned to the channel throughout the week. I'm going to be breaking down individually the Puello versus Martin fight, as well as the GAR versus Ryo fight. But today, let's talk about what happened in the main event between Tank and Lamont Roach. We know the fight ended in a controversial majority draw. There's a few different storylines we need to talk about. Was Tank Davis exposed in his game planning? Did Lamont Roach lay out the blueprint for future fighters and future opponents to beat Tank Davis? And more importantly, the referee missing one of the most important calls in a world title fight in a long time in the 9th round when Tank Davis got hit with a scrape jab. The punch clearly lands. One of those sort of jabs that just brushes the eye, but doesn't in such a way to where it scratches the lens and you get blurry-eyed vision. He then takes a knee and the ref just stops the fight. Doesn't deduct him a point, has a little chat with Tank and lets the fight go on. We know when it came to an end, the scorecards were so close in such a way that if that would have been ruled a knockdown and Roach gets round 9, 10-8, he wins the fight. He becomes a 2-division world champion and the first to defeat Tank Davis. After it was all said and done, a lot of fighters had a lot of things to say about it. Let's have a look at what Terrence Crawford and Devin Haney had to say about it. If you're Tank Davis or you're a Tank Davis fan, how he's been going about his business, especially online, the things he says over the last few years about him being the face of boxing, him being the best boxer of his era, he compares himself to Floyd Mayweather. You leave yourself open for criticism when you don't have a stellar performance. Now, in my opinion, I think Tank was a little bit off. I think, though, that his game planning, it's always about, what do we say, what have you done for me lately? He was 30-0, 28 knockouts going to this fight. His approach and his attack have worked every single time he's fought somebody, so why change it? In this approach, it takes him a little while to get warmed up. He computes the data of his opponent, and mid to late rounds, he usually knocks his opponent out. The difference was with Lamont Roach, it was a common foe. They had fought before a couple times in the amateurs, and leading up to fight week, a lot of us were saying that Lamont Roach's confidence was manufactured, but what we saw on fight night, it was true. Lamont Roach did not fear Tank Davis. Were they hesitant in the first few rounds? Yes, both guys were. There wasn't a lot of action, there wasn't a lot of punches thrown, but you could feel the anxiety and the stress building up, and you knew that it was going to boil over. And around the 4th to 5th round, they started slugging, and in Lamont Roach, we saw a guy who was not afraid of Tank Davis at all. He was exchanging with him. He was getting the better of some of the exchanges. And I think it had to do with a little bit of Lamont believed in himself, but it had to take him a while within the fight for him to believe in himself even more, that he belonged there and that he could beat Tank. And by the mid to late rounds, you saw a guy who was outboxing Tank. You saw a guy who wasn't taking back steps, who was countering him, and there were some gorgeous exchanges on both sides. This isn't all bad for Tank Davis. It is a draw on his record, but it's not a loss. And I want to go over today in this video, I want to go over those punch stats, which will surprise most of you people. Before we continue, I want to ask, was this a robbery? Now, we're going to go over the total punch stats, the jabs, and the power punches. So if you stand on the line to say it wasn't a robbery, just so you know, Lamont Roach outpunched Tank, and he outlanded Tank. And in that 9th round, that was a knockdown. The knee to the ground is a knockdown, 10-8 round. Lamont then wins a decision on the scorecards, but we know what happened. So moving forward, you in the comment section below answer this question right now. Was this a robbery? Should Lamont Roach be awarded the 135 WBA world title? Moving forward, let's take a closer look at these stats that told the story of the fight. Let's look at the total jabs thrown throughout the entire fight. Tank Davis throws 69 landing 10 at a 15% clip. Roach throws 148 landing 25 at a 17% clip. We knew it was going to be orthodox for a southpaw, and Roach was going to use his jab to parry. He was going to use his jab to feint, to set up his backhand, and this is why he almost triples up Davis on punches thrown and over doubles him on jabs landed. Power punches throughout the fight. Tank throws 210 landing 93 at a 44% clip. Lamont Roach throws 252 power punches landing 87 at a 35% clip. So Roach wasn't as accurate, but who would have thought that he would have outpunched power punches with Tank Davis? Tank landed 48 to the body, Roach landed 30. And overall total punches, this is a stat that shocks most people, myself included. Tank throws 279, landing 103 at a 37% clip. Roach throws 400, landing 112 at a 28% clip. So Roach wasn't as accurate. He threw more, which always is the case with Tank's opponents. But what we never see is Tank's opponents landing more. Now, this is what started happening around the mid to late rounds. I want to say something that you could take this however you want it. My biggest beef with Tank Davis in this fight wasn't him fighting Lamont Roach to a draw. Roach put Tank in a position to have to fight him. So we know what we saw with what we saw. My biggest beef with Tank was his lack of concentration, him talking to the referee, almost coming off as like he's complaining. This was before round 9. Somewhere around rounds 4 or 5, he's turning to the ref, he's talking to the people in the crowd. We've seen him do this before, but then in between rounds, he's arguing with his corner. And Tank has always been able to get away with this sort of behavior and never had to pay for it. And I think in this fight, we got to see the fractures in his mindset, specifically when the lights are bright and the tension is boiling over. And it was the first time in my eyes watching Tank that I saw a guy doubting himself. Let's take a closer look at that knee he took in the 9th, which was a knockdown. Listen what Tank had to say about it.
I just got my hair done 2 days ago and she put grease in my shit, so the shit was like, you know, like when you sweating and things like that and the grease come in my face, it burnt my eyes type shit. Damn, why y'all booing like I'm saying bullshit? Like, this is real facts.
I'm gonna debunk that real quick. Tank said that it's a chemical that his person who did his braids put in his hair that got into his eye and stung. Now, if we didn't have video footage of Roach landing a jab, not flush, but just grazing the eye, then maybe that's an excuse. Also, Tank, if we didn't have a female division, women box. All women put things in their hair. When's the last time you saw a woman take a knee because they said they got chemical in her eye? I've checked over the last 12 hours. I couldn't find any footage of any female boxer taking a knee, taking a knockdown, saying that hair products were in their eye and it was burning. Tank Davis, come on, man. That is an excuse that's going to follow him around the rest of his career. And it's funny to see the casuals, it's funny to see the haters, and it's funny to see the boxing fandom. We know we're as fickle as what have you done for me lately, and people were turning on Tank instantly. The fans were booing him when he said that excuse. So I want to ask you guys right now, was it a robbery? Was it a knockdown? Does Tank lose anything in the public's eye with how he handled the adversity? And where do you put Lamont Roach now? Because in my opinion, this is not a controversial statement. That guy's stock grew through the roof with his performance. I think he always knew the dog he had in him, but he just proved the world that he was right in assessing that he does belong. What happens next with both fighters? Do you want to see a rematch? Your opinion of the fight, leave all that in the comment section below.